Wednesday, 8:10 a.m. My coffee had gone cold without me noticing. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the table like it had changed shape overnight. The papers were placed dead center, squared up with the edge of the wood, perfectly aligned. Not tossed down, not wrinkled, set there with intent, like someone wanted me to see them before I saw anything else. Claire didn't walk in. She stopped in the doorway, half in shadow, half in the morning light. Her robe was tied tight. Her face was clean, like she'd already made peace with whatever this was. Next to her stood a man in a dark suit, folder tucked under one arm. He looked like he belonged in offices with glass walls. "Not in my kitchen, Mr. Harper," he said, calm and practiced. "Michael Brooks, attorney for Mrs. Harper." My throat tightened, but my hand stayed steady around the mug. He slid his eyes to the papers and spoke the sentence like it was a policy, not a life. "You have 48 hours to vacate the house." Claire didn't blink. She didn't correct him. She didn't soften it. And right there, with the coffee cooling in my hand, I understood there wasn't a way back. Before that morning, my life ran on repeat in a way that felt almost honorable. Alarm at 5. Boots on concrete. Lunch in a cooler that smelled faintly of plywood and diesel no matter how often I scrubbed it. I'd drive the same route to the site, stop at the same gas station, nod at the same cashier who never asked questions. The days were measured in loads, pours, inspections, and the small arguments that come with schedules that never line up with weather. Construction made sense to me because problems had edges. A bowed wall had a cause. A cracked slab told you where it failed. You didn't have to guess. You could put your hands on it, read it, and fix it. There was a straight line between effort and outcome. Even when it went sideways in ways you could see. I was a foreman by then, not the biggest title in the world, but enough responsibility to keep my head busy. I knew what every man on my crew could do in 10 minutes and what would take him all day. I knew how long it took to set forms right if you didn't cut corners. I knew the exact sound a nail gun made when someone was getting sloppy. I liked that kind of knowing. It felt clean. Home was the opposite in a quiet way. Claire and I didn't fight. We didn't throw things. We weren't the couple you heard through apartment walls. Most evenings were simple. I'd come in, wash my hands until the water ran clear, and she'd be at the stove or on the couch with the TV low. We'd talk about errands, bills, her day at the office. A few sentences here, a few there. Then silence that didn't feel hostile, just settled. We'd go to bed at the same time. We'd wake up and do it again. If you'd asked me then if my marriage was good, I would have said it was stable. I would have used that word like it was the same thing. The signs were there, but they didn't arrive like a siren. They arrived like dust. Slow, fine, easy to ignore until you ran your finger across a surface and realized it had been building for months. Claire started guarding her phone in small ways. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just turning it face down when she left the room. Carrying it with her to the bathroom, which she never used to do. If a notification lit the screen, she'd glance at it fast and then flick it away like it was nothing. Sometimes she'd smile without thinking, then catch herself and smooth her face back into neutral. She also got careful with her words. That was the part one noticed most, because I work with men who say exactly what they mean, even when it's crude. Claire began speaking like everything was a clause. "I might be late. It depends. We'll see." She stopped using "we" for anything that reached beyond the weekend. Vacation talk turned into "maybe later." Future plans became fog. And then there were the new contacts. I caught a glimpse once when her phone rang while she was in the shower. The screen showed a name I didn't recognize, something bland, MB, and the call went to voicemail. I didn't touch it. I just stood there listening to the water running behind the door, feeling stupid for noticing a thing I couldn't prove mattered. She started dressing differently for work, too. Not more revealing, just more intentional. New perfume, applied lightly, but I could smell it when she leaned in to kiss my cheek. She'd come home and head straight to the laundry room, clothes in a neat pile, like she didn't want the day lingering in the house. I told myself it was stress. A promotion. A new project. Claire had always been ambitious in a quiet, organized way. She liked lists and color-coded calendars. She liked feeling ahead of things. If she was pulling away, maybe it was just her mind being somewhere else, the way mine was on a rushed poor day. Stability felt like silence, and we were silent more often than not. There were nights she'd sit across from me at the table, scrolling with her thumb, nodding at whatever I said, and I'd think. This is what marriage looks like after the heat fades. Two people sharing a life without needing to perform it. I believed that. I wanted to believe it, because wanting to believe something is its own kind of work. Looking back, it wasn't that I didn't see the changes. I saw them. I logged them the way I log every small shift on a job site. The crew's mood. The supplier running late. A foreman on another trade getting too friendly with the inspector. I saw it all. I just didn't connect the dots. Not yet. The attorney kept his voice even, the way people do when they're trained to sound reasonable under any circumstance. He explained the documents in a sequence, not pausing long enough for interruption, as if momentum itself was part of the strategy. Temporary occupancy termination, personal property retrieval, timelines, conditions, everything had a label. Claire stayed quiet. She didn't sit. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms folded, watching the floor instead of me. That detail landed harder than anything he said. When he reached the section about my belongings, he looked up for the first time. You're permitted to remove your tools, personal effects, and vehicle within the 48-hour window, he said. Permitted. The word moved through me slowly, like cold water finding a crack. Not allowed. Not entitled. Permitted. As if my life had already been sorted, inventoried, and reduced to a list someone else had approved. I nodded once, because nodding felt easier than speaking. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. Instead, something clicked into place with a clean, internal sound. The kind you hear when a level finally settles dead center. This hadn't been decided last night. Or this week. Or even recently. The precision of the papers, the timing, the way the house already felt emotionally vacant, it all lined up. The distance. The careful language. The phone calls that ended when I entered the room. The new name I'd seen on her screen. The silence I'd mistaken for peace. This was preparation. I studied the margins of the document while he talked, noticing how clean they were, how intentional. No smudges. No hesitation. I imagined Claire sitting somewhere else, signing these same pages days earlier, maybe weeks, pen moving steadily. I imagined conversations I wasn't part of. Plans made without friction because I was never meant to push back. There was no surge of anger. No urge to argue terms or demand explanations. Those reactions belonged to a version of me that believed this was a misunderstanding, something salvageable with the right effort. That version faded quietly, without ceremony. What replaced it was clarity. I realized that everything I was feeling now, this calm, this distance, wasn't shock. It was recognition. The same feeling I get when I walk onto a job site and see a structure that's already failed, even if it hasn't collapsed yet. You don't panic. You don't try to shore it up with hope. You step back. You stop touching it. You let it go. The attorney slid a pen toward me. If you'll sign here, we can conclude for the morning, he said. I picked it up without comment. Claire finally looked at me then, like she expected something. A question. A protest. A crack in the surface she could use to justify what she'd done. I didn't give her one. As I signed my name, carefully, the way I always do, I understood something with absolute certainty. This wasn't happening to me. It had already happened. And from that moment on, I stopped trying to understand why. I focused on what was real. I signed the papers without argument, without hesitation. It wasn't shock. It wasn't rage. It wasn't denial. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the story I thought I was living had been updated long before I realized it. I handed the pen back with a steady hand. The attorney closed the folder and tucked it under his arm like nothing had happened. Claire didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched me with eyes that looked tired, like the weight of her own choices was heavier than she anticipated. I walked out of the house that morning with two things. My toolbox, worn, scuffed, organized the way I liked it, and the keys to my old pickup. Nothing else. I didn't stop for breakfast. I didn't look back. I just drove. I found a room above an old auto shop on the east side of town. It had once been an office for parts, but the owner had converted it into living space to rent. The air smelled of oil and rubber, and the thin walls carried every clatter from below. The fridge was empty, and the heater clunked on with a groan that felt familiar, like an old machine you'd patched one too many times. The first few days were quiet in a different way than the house had been. No quiet of routine. This was quiet of undone things. Unmade decisions. Lost conversations. I slept in work clothes because it felt easier than choosing new pajamas. I ate whatever I could find at the corner store. I washed dishes in cold water because the sink's hot tap didn't work. At work, I showed up early and left late, the way I always had. I kept my head down, called the orders for concrete, checked depths and levels, managed crews. On the surface, nothing changed. I was still the same Noah Harper. Same boots. Same muscle memory. Same cadence of commands. But inside, something had stopped trying to be mended. That was the real break. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come in a moment of rage. It came as a stillness. A refusal to put energy into something that had already been dismantled. The house was gone. But more than that, the part of me that tried to smooth over things, that believed problems could be fixed if I just showed up with enough effort, that part quieted. I stopped mentally undoing things that couldn't be undone. I stopped imagining conversations that might change outcomes. I stopped waiting for her to answer my calls or texts. Friends asked how I was holding up. I told them I was fine. It was true in the sense that I wasn't unraveling or shouting. I wasn't driving recklessly or skipping work. I was just present, occupied, grounded, detached from the need to make sense of a situation that had already made its own sense without me. Nighttime was the hardest. That space above the auto shop was too quiet when the street lamps dimmed. I'd lie awake listening to traffic hum faintly, and the silence would sit heavy against my chest. I found myself reaching for a part of my life that no longer existed, not out of hope, but habit. I noticed how little I thought about what Claire was doing. It wasn't bitterness. It was something colder, more efficient, acceptance. The emotional loops that once kept me awake stopped running. They weren't unresolved so much as exhausted. At work, I began noticing patterns in people that I never paid attention to before. How easily folks disguised avoidance as calm. How many conversations were polite dances around truth. How many promises were made with words that evaporated under scrutiny. I saw that my own silence, before all this, wasn't peace. It was a kind of weariness. A refusal to disturb things that were already teetering. Here, in this small rented room, with the engine rattling below at random hours, I stopped trying to fix something that wasn't mine to repair. I let the sound of the neighborhood fill the spaces where expectation used to be. I let the cold mornings and loud nights remind me that life moves, with or without clarity. And while I didn't look forward yet, because looking forward means a future you believe in, I did stop clutching at a past that was gone. I showed up. I worked. I breathed. I stopped fixing what wasn't meant to be fixed. That was the real break. I started watching the way I watch a job site after a near miss, quiet, wide-eyed, taking inventory without telling anyone I'd seen the flaw. The room above the auto shop taught me that. You can't argue with noise through thin walls. You don't negotiate with a leaking faucet. You just note it, adapt, and move on. So I did the same with everything else. I kept my routine tight. Work, shower, food, sleep. No extra motion. On site, men got cut the moment the numbers shifted. I'd seen it for years, but I'd never studied it. A superintendent would walk a row of trucks like he was choosing which ones to keep and which ones to scrap. A developer would talk about community impact in the morning meeting, then erase affordable units with a red pen by lunch. It wasn't personal. It was arithmetic. I respected that more than I should have, because at least it was honest in its own way. And then I started seeing the same arithmetic in Claire. At first there was nothing, just the absence. No calls. No texts. No, did you eat? No, are you okay? The silence didn't hurt the way I expected. It confirmed what the papers had already said. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was a removed piece. Then, on a Monday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was checking rebar spacing. Claire. Hope you're doing alright. Let me know if you need anything. The message sat there like a courtesy card left on a coffin. I didn't answer right away. I read it twice, then a third time, listening to the job site sounds around me, the diesel, the men shouting measurements, the slap of plywood. Her words were soft, but they had edges. Not the kind meant to cut me. The kind meant to protect her. Proof she'd checked in. Proof she'd been reasonable. I waited until that night and replied with 4 words. Me. I'm handling it. Thanks. No questions. No bait. No emotion to pull on. After that, the pattern repeated. 2 weeks of nothing, then a brief reach out. Always polite. Always timed like she remembered something was supposed to happen. Sometimes it was a random thought. Saw your old truck today. Sometimes it was an offer. If you need more time for anything, tell me. But the offers never came with specifics, because specifics create responsibility. And responsibility was what she'd hired an attorney to avoid. I began stacking facts the way I stack material receipts. Date, time, context. Not because I planned revenge. Because I needed reality to stay solid under my feet. In the shop room, I kept a small notebook in the top drawer of the cheap dresser. Nothing dramatic, just entries. Wednesday, 8:10 a.m. served papers. Monday, 3:47 p.m. first check in text. Thursday, 9:12 p.m. voicemail from unknown number, no message. At work, I listened more than I spoke. I watched how people performed innocence. The guys who swore they'd ordered the right lumber. The subcontractor who smiled too wide when the inspector walked up. The developer who talked about values while calculating profit margins. Everyone had a version of themselves they wanted on record. Claire was building hers, too. And I let her. Because waiting wasn't weakness. Waiting was measurement. It was letting the load settle so you could see where the structure was going to fail. It was letting someone keep talking until they revealed what they thought was safe to reveal. I didn't chase explanations. I didn't ask for closure. I took the only advantage I had left. I stayed still long enough to see the whole shape of it. That's what I did then. I watched. I logged. I kept my hands steady. And I waited. The call from my sister came late, after the shop downstairs had closed and the street had settled into that hollow quiet that only shows up after midnight. "Are you sitting down?" Leah asked. I was on the edge of the mattress, boots off, back against the wall. Oil smell still hanging in the air. "I am," I said. She exhaled once, sharp. "Dad left something. He put conditions on it. They've been waiting." I didn't answer right away. My father had been gone for years, long enough that his absence had become structural. You don't think about missing beams once the roof stops sagging. You just learn where not to stand. "There's a lawyer," she continued. "Not here. Nevada. Truckee. Old notary office. They said they sent notices, but they were deferred." Deferred. Another careful word. "They said it couldn't be opened until now," Leah said. "Until a triggering event." I asked what the event was. "They wouldn't say," she replied. "But they asked for you by name." 2 days later, I drove north before dawn. The pickup climbing through fog and pine. The road tightening into curves that demanded attention. Truckee felt preserved, like a place that had decided to stay put while everything else moved past it. The notary office sat off a side street, unmarked except for a brass plate dull with age. Inside, the air was cool and still. The lawyer was older, gray hair combed flat, hands steady in a way that suggested long familiarity with waiting. He verified my identity without small talk, then led me to a room with a wall safe recessed into old wood. He opened it without ceremony. Inside was a sealed envelope, thick, my name typed cleanly across the front. A second envelope followed. Then a dark blue bank card, branded, heavier than it looked. The letter was from my father. Written in his precise hand. No apologies. No explanations. Just instructions. He'd known the business cycles. He'd known how visibility worked. How certain assets were safest when they were quiet. The trust had been structured decades earlier, layered through jurisdictions designed to repel curiosity. It couldn't be accessed while I was married. It couldn't be accessed while I shared property. It couldn't be accessed while my life was considered stable. Only after separation. Only after displacement. Only after I was, in his words, no longer protected by illusion. I read it twice. Then a third time. The lawyer explained the mechanics in a low voice. Numbers followed. Large ones. The kind that force professionals to slow down their speech. The kind that come with policies instead of congratulations. A week later, I sat across from a private banker in San Francisco, glass walls around us, city humming beyond them. He smiled at first. Then he reviewed the documents again. His posture shifted. The smile thinned, recalibrated. "You understand," he said carefully, "that this changes how certain institutions perceive you." "I understand," I said. He nodded. "You're no longer invisible." The word didn't land like pride. It landed like confirmation. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching people pass, phones pressed to ears, bags slung over shoulders. Nothing about me looked different. Same jacket, same boots, same weight in my pockets. But the ground under me had changed. And for the first time since Wednesday morning at 8:10 a.m., I didn't feel like I was reacting to something already decided. I felt like I had entered a phase my father had planned for. Quietly, deliberately, and on my own terms. I saw Claire at the charity event because I wasn't trying to avoid her. That was the difference. The room was all glass and white linen, overlooking the city, the kind of place that made generosity feel curated. People spoke softly, laughed in measured bursts. I stood near the back with a drink I hadn't touched, listening more than participating. No one there knew me. That suited me fine. Then I noticed the shift. A pause in movement, a slight recalibration in the air. I turned and saw her across the room, framed by warm light and people who leaned toward her when she spoke. She looked composed, expensive, but not loud. The same control she'd always valued. Her eyes found me and widened just enough to register surprise before smoothing over. She hesitated, then crossed the room with practiced ease. "Noah," she said, smiling. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I was invited," I said. She glanced down at my jacket, my boots, then back up. "You're still in construction?" "Yes," I said, just on a larger scale. The words weren't sharp. They weren't meant to be. They were simply accurate. She nodded, absorbing that, searching for a follow-up that didn't come. There was a flicker of something, confusion, maybe curiosity, but it passed. "Well," she said lightly, "it's good to see you." I inclined my head. "You too." She waited. I didn't fill the space. Eventually, she excused herself. Later, her father approached me near the balcony. He carried himself like a man accustomed to leverage, even in social settings. He spoke carefully, as if each sentence had been rehearsed for optimal effect. "Claire mentioned you," he said. "She's been reflective." I didn't respond. "She may have acted hastily," he continued. "There's room for conversation, reconciliation, even opportunity." I looked out over the city lights, then back at him. "No," I said. The word settled between us, calm and immovable. He studied me, clearly reassessing. "You're certain?" "Yes." I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't need him to understand. He nodded once, stiffly, and walked away. I stayed another 10 minutes, then left. Outside, the night air was cool and unbothered. I stood on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, feeling nothing pull at me. That was when I knew. The meeting wasn't a test. It was a confirmation, and I had already passed. I set it up the way I set up a clean pour, quiet, staged, and with no extra eyes on it. The trust managers had already handed me a structure that could move without dragging my name across every surface. So I used it. I formed an LLC with a name that meant nothing, something you'd see on a line of subcontractor bids and forget 5 minutes later. No Harper. No family reference. No vanity. Just an entity that could sign and wire and own. The project I'd been working on before everything fell apart was still moving through approvals, same mixed-use development, same glossy renderings, same speeches about revitalization. I knew it inside out because I'd walked its dirt in the dark, marked grades in chalk, watched crews fight over laydown space. I knew where the water pooled after rain. I knew which corners were cut before they were cut. I also knew what the developer planned to erase first. Affordable units, green space, anything that didn't pay back immediately. I didn't call anyone from my old crew. I didn't announce anything. I let professionals do what they do. Due diligence, escrow, silence. Meetings in offices where people spoke in numbers instead of feelings. Pages turned, ink dried. I listened more than I talked. When it finally happened, it didn't feel like a win. It felt like a transfer of weight. The acquisition closed on a Tuesday. No confetti, no handshake photo, just confirmations, signatures, and a last email that read like a receipt. By lunch, the project belonged to my company. By the end of the week, the old developer was out, and everyone on site was still showing up the way they always had. Hard hats, thermoses, half-awake jokes at the gate. I kept showing up too. Same truck, same boots, same habit of arriving early enough to see the site before it got loud. I wore a hard hat like I always had. I walked the lines, checked the forms, asked questions that sounded like any foreman's questions. No one suspected ownership because ownership doesn't wear dirt. Ownership doesn't carry a tape measure. Ownership stays behind glass. I didn't want glass. I wanted truth. The first changes came in paperwork, not speeches. A revised plan set. A quiet directive to hold the affordable units in place. A note to keep the green strip that had been labeled future phase like it was optional. A new directive to source materials locally where possible, Not because it looked good on a brochure, but because it kept men employed and money circulating where the work was actually being done. The architects pushed back at first, softly, politely, with that tone people use when they think they're talking to an investor who needs education. I let them talk. Then I asked one question at a time. How many units can we keep without compromising structural integrity? Where can we reduce cost without reducing safety? What happens to runoff if we pave this section? What does the neighborhood lose if we remove this space? Questions grounded in consequence, not ideology. The answers changed the room. On site, changes were smaller and more human. The schedule stopped punishing the crews for delays that came from the top. The safety meetings got serious again. The subcontractors who always forgot their obligations started finding their memories after contracts tightened. People noticed that the job was steadier. Less chaos. Less panic. They didn't know why. They just felt it. That was enough. There were moments I had to swallow the urge to reveal myself, not for pride, but to stop the rumors that always bloom when a project shifts. Guys wondered if the new ownership meant layoffs. They wondered if the site would get sold. They wondered if the work would dry up halfway through. I didn't address it directly. I just made decisions that answered them. Work stayed. Pay stayed. The plan held. The site began to move like something built by people who intended to stand behind it. Sometimes I'd catch a superintendent watching me a little longer than usual, like he was sensing a difference he couldn't name. Once, a project manager asked me, half joking, "You got friends upstairs now?" I looked at the slab drawings in my hands and said, "I've got responsibilities." And I meant it. As the months passed, the development started to look less like an extraction and more like a place. Trees stayed on the plan. The affordable units stayed in the count. The green space stopped being a marketing garnish and became a real strip of ground that kids could run across. People began shifting around me without knowing they were shifting. Inspectors treated the project with respect instead of suspicion. Subcontractors stopped playing games. The crews stood a little taller because the work finally felt worth doing. And through all of it, I kept my name out of the air. Not because I was hiding. Because I didn't need recognition to build something that held. Claire drove past the site on a Friday afternoon, months after the last piece of steel went up and the noise stopped being constant. The road in front had been repaved, the sidewalks poured clean, the fencing gone. What used to be churned dirt and tire ruts was now a finished entrance with a small strip of trees that hadn't been on the original drawings. I know it was her because I saw the car before I saw her face. Same make, newer year. Same color she'd chosen because it didn't show dust. It slowed at the turn-in like the driver couldn't help it, like something inside her wanted one more look before she let the place become just another thing she drove past. I was out near the south side with a crew, walking a punch list. Nothing dramatic. Just the last stage, checking door swings, looking at caulk lines, making sure the irrigation was set right. The kind of work no one posts online because it isn't glamorous, but it's what makes a project hold up when the brochures are gone. A guy on my crew said, "That a friend of yours?" "No," I said. The car stopped at the light. For a few seconds, it was perfectly still. Sunlight flashed across the windshield, and then I saw her through it, hands on the wheel. Claire's head turned, scanning the finished buildings the way people do when they're trying to match a memory to a reality that doesn't need them anymore. Her eyes found me. Not the way you find a stranger. The way you find a misplaced tool you didn't realize you'd been looking for until it's suddenly there in plain sight. She didn't get out. She didn't wave. She just stared, and I could almost see the math running behind her expression. The same kind of calculation I'd learned to recognize in meetings. The same pause that comes when someone realizes the outcome they expected didn't arrive. I didn't lift my hand. I didn't nod. I didn't change what I was doing. I bent down, checked a chalk mark, and spoke to one of the guys about a threshold that needed adjustment. My voice stayed even. My attention stayed where it belonged, on the work in front of me, on the people who showed up for it, on the details that would matter after everyone forgot the backstory. The light changed. Her car moved forward. As it rolled past, I felt the smallest pull in my chest, not pain, not longing. Just the brief recognition of a chapter closing in real time. The human part of me acknowledged that she was looking for something. A sign, a reaction, a way to rewrite the ending into something softer for herself. I didn't give her that. Not out of cruelty. Out of accuracy. There wasn't anything left to prove. No score to settle. No speech to deliver. The last time I'd stood in the kitchen with cold coffee in my hand, I'd understood that my life with her had already been decided elsewhere. Since then, I'd built something that didn't require her understanding to stand upright. Her car disappeared down the road, swallowed by traffic and distance like it had never been there. One of the guys asked if we were good to keep moving. Yeah, I said, let's finish it. And we did. We walked the site until the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened across the new sidewalks. We checked the last items, took photos, made notes. Ordinary work. Honest work. When I finally stood up and looked across the completed project, trees in the ground, affordable units still in place, green space open and real, I felt only acceptance. Not victory. Not revenge. Just the quiet relief of being out of a story that was never mine to keep. I started the foundation quietly, the same way I did everything else by then. No press. No launch event. Just filings, meetings, and a small rented office with mismatched chairs and a table scarred by old work. We focused on retraining. Men whose bodies were wearing out faster than the industry admitted. Single mothers who needed certifications that led to real wages, not promises. We paid for time, not inspiration. Childcare stipends. Tool allowances. Transit passes. Practical things. The work mattered because it stayed small enough to be real. Life didn't transform overnight. I still woke early. Still drove a pickup that carried more dust than shine. I still walked sites, argued over details, checked measurements twice. Construction didn't change for me. My relationship to it did. I no longer built to prove anything. I built because I chose to. Some evenings, I'd stand at the edge of a finished project and watch people move through it without knowing who had cleared the ground or kept the plans intact. That anonymity felt earned, peaceful, like setting a beam perfectly level and walking away without marking your name. Claire never reached out again. I didn't expect her to. Some stories end without acknowledgement, and that's not failure. That's completion. I learned that stability isn't silence. It's alignment. When your actions match your values without negotiation, the noise fades on its own. I'm still in construction. I just build on my own terms now.